Welcome to Sharp Vision with 25, the podcast that brings you sharp insights, expert conversations, and real-world strategies to help you price projects with confidence. This episode gets right to the heart of one of the most expensive, unsolved questions in the aerospace and defense industry. What does it actually cost to get a bid wrong? In this episode, Magnus Bjorendahl, 25's co-founder and CEO, sits down with Dave Blatner and John Mikos from SAP to dig into why this problem is so persistent and how the 25 and SAP partnership is uniquely positioned to solve it. Dave Blatner is an industry advisor at SAP for aerospace and defense, working closely with some of the biggest names in the industry on strategy, growth, and innovation. John Mikos is an A&D value advisor at SAP and a former U.S. Army lieutenant colonel with 20 years of active duty service, followed by senior consulting work at Deloitte, and is now helping SAP's A&D customers unlock the value of SAP and their partner solutions. This conversation covers a lot of ground: why legacy primes like Lockheed and RTX face a different kind of challenge than the startups now entering the market, why winning a bid is only half the battle when lifecycle profitability is on the line, and how having a genuine single source of truth is what separates good AI from just a good story. We've got deep expertise and real experiences to share. Let's get into it.
Welcome, Dave and John. Excited to have this conversation with you today and talk a little bit about aerospace and defense and how 25 and SAP is working together to help the industry. Before we get going into SAP and 25, let's talk a little bit about the industry itself. The topic of cost estimating is a topic, that I would say it's quite common that companies are struggling with this. We hear in the news several times a lot of things happening with cost overruns and whatnot. What's your take on that? What have you observed when you've been out talking to the industry in and around cost estimating and pricing and whatnot, and what currently companies are doing?
Yeah, so Magnus, always appreciate a chance to sit around and talk shop. So delighted to be here. You raise a very good point. I would say that when I'm out talking to the industry, there are two different dimensions in the world of estimating that I believe are kind of happening right now. If we think of the traditional brick and mortar, 40, 50 years, multi-platform suppliers, right? So those could be the Lockheed Martins, those could be the RTXs, they could be the Safrans, the Boeings of the world. What we find out is that, they have a significant amount of history upon which to try and base their estimating process, but they're really not very efficient at that because the business model has changed, right? They have become the system integrator. So 80% of the work content is going to come in from the suppliers in their network. And there's not a very efficient control of the data exchange, the timeliness of data, and ultimately the richness of the data. So think of it this way, right? Every time I'm looking for a system that requires propulsion, I may be going to a different propulsion company. I may use the same propulsion company 2 or 3 times over the cycle of, let's say, 10 years, but I don't own their data. So what we find out is the fragmentation, the quality, and really kind of the efficacy of the bid coming together is problematic. So it's been important for them to look at new paradigms to kind of break through that sludge that controls that slowness. The other side of the coin, right, are these, for lack of a better word, we'll call them silicon startups that really are just, a couple of bright-minded engineers that don't have a lot of history, right? We went from zero to swarm drone technology in the course of a calendar year. So for their perspective, they just kind of go by their gut and what they think they can do. Now, the reality is that when they're competing on the same program, right, it looks a little bit odd. The less than a year startup versus the 40-year company. And so ultimately, I'll come back and simply say that for those that have history is their best line of defense against things like overruns that become significant, like billions of dollars of overruns. And therefore, what we really want to find out is how can they accelerate supply chain collaboration in the estimating process? Because those supply chains want to win as a supply chain, right? The startups have a smaller statement of work. it's mostly kind of controlled in-house. So hopefully that gives a little bit of an idea of what I'm seeing in the industry. But John, you're out there pounding the pavement quite often as well.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think, the history around the bid and preparing a proper proposal response is hyper-focused. The only thing I would add to everything you said, which I agree with, is what I'm seeing is aerospace and defense companies thinking about capture management across the entire life cycle of the system. When I think about 25 years ago, it seemed to me the focus was on probability of probability of winning the work, and figuring out how to deliver it later. Well, companies are recognizing that is a very costly proposition, that maintaining these systems throughout a life cycle and delivering across the life cycle to include aftermarket, to include sustainment, means that they have to think about probability of win, beyond probability of win, and really delivering profitably throughout the entire life cycle. So I think the bid has become very focused, but beyond that, they're thinking about the life cycle of profitability, and that's impacted by their initial proposal response.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's true in other industries too, by the way. And I work across industries, and it's not just about winning; it's also about winning profitably, right? Because in the short run, the sales guy might not really see that, right? The sales guy is happy, I won a big deal, and they run off into the sunset, right? But then the people that have to deliver it, if it runs over cost, that's not really their problem anymore. When 25 was first founded, and Brad from Cubic as well, the CEO, I think, Dave, his initial proposition of why he wanted 25 to be built in the first place was an accountability issue. He was so upset with the fact that his sales people and his delivery people were pointing finger at each other. Like the sales guys were pointing the finger, you can't deliver it, and the delivery guys were saying, well, you sold it in a way that I cannot deliver it. So it's like, no, and through that handoff, all accountability flew off. So the classic example is the sales says they sold the project with a 20% margin, and the deliverer says, well, I can't deliver it for better than 10 or 15. So now you've lost 5 to 10% margin before the work has even started. So that's like a classic example of what you're describing there, John, which is that it's even as short-sighted as in when you hand it off from sales and delivery, even way earlier than aftermarket and whatnot. It's like right off the bat, if delivery doesn't agree with the plan, then you kind of shot yourself in the foot already. The other thing I wanted to point out, which is something that I've observed, is that even within the industry, within an individual company, you have this issue that the problem of estimating involves lots of different parts of the organization. So in order to estimate a large A&D program, you need to work with engineering, you need to work with program management, you need to work with manufacturing, you need to work with supply chain. So even within that organization, they tend to have specialist system for estimating. So the engineering guys goes off and estimate in one way, the manufacturing guys go off and estimate in their way, and the supply chain goes off and estimate in their way. And then a lot of times Excel spreadsheets is how it all comes together. So as much as you think like, oh, these are modern enterprises, they're all AI and fancy, the real reality is there's still a ton of Excel spreadsheets that are being used to consolidate things and bring things together. There's still tons of different systems, even for one proposal to build something out. It's an area where it's really ripe for modernization. It's kind of my take on this. I don't know if you want to add something to that, or if you've observed similar things.
Yeah, maybe I'll add to that. You're exactly right. And the way I would describe that, another way to describe what you just referred to is A&D companies needing to move towards single source of truth. We've seen that in the industry. Many A&D companies have grown by acquisition, and there's been a real trend over the last 5 to 7 years to harmonize their application landscape. In many cases, become more pure A&D companies, divest themselves of some of their commercial entities and focus on the aerospace and defense industry. We're working with a couple of large companies like RTX and Lockheed Martin that are trying to go to a one company vision. They're trying to move from this operating company, from this holding company model more to an operating company model where they have that single source of truth. And I think that's really the beauty of the synergy between 25 and SAP. SAP, as partners with these companies, is leveraging S/4HANA and the business suite, rationalizing their application landscape, harmonizing their data in a single source of truth so they can be one RTX or one Lockheed Martin. And that's coming from contract on. Where 25 and where I'm excited about SAP and 25's partnership is 25 is really focused on the very, very front end before the contract, becoming that single source of truth before the system is even manufactured at the bid and proposal stage. And it's leveraging that synergy that SAP is providing and harnessing it together in one place so that you can get at, A&D companies can get at exactly what you were talking about, that single source of truth across engineering, products, supply chain, sales, and finance, so that a proposal response or a bid is both optimized for winning, but also optimized for profitability. So absolutely, Magnus, I think you've hit upon exactly the crux of the benefits of the partnership between our companies.
Thank you, John. You're actually already almost answering my next question, but I'm going to
Oh,
go
okay.
no, it's good. It's good. I like that you're a step ahead. So the next question I wanted to talk about, so we kind of recognize that there is an issue in the industry, or a challenge, an opportunity, however you want to think about that. And, where 25 and SAP is coming together to kind of address that challenge, I think. So I like kind of for you to talk a little bit about how you see that, like the value of not just 25 on its own or SAP on its own, but really like the 1 + 1 = 3 in terms of, what can SAP and 25 do together here for this industry?
You're exactly right. First of all, A&D companies are going through a lot of transformational efforts, as I described, and the synergies between the 25 offering and SAP is very, very strong. It basically is the same objective, to create single source of truth in the proposal management and material cost estimating and labor cost estimating phase, and in delivery. So it's a perfect fit.
John, yeah, I'll just build upon what you said and maybe slightly tie it back. So the tie back is really Magnus's kind of industry observation and touched on the different departments, right? So I'm material estimating, I'm engineering, I'm labor, I may even be facilities, I'm the supply chain person. But if you look at like 10 years ago, right, when those people started in those, there wasn't the vision of what 25 has kind of brought to the market. So we had to do our job, and Excel was readily available and everyone grabbed one, right? And so then we tried to do this next higher assembly of the inputs of inputs where the multi-spreadsheet. But now we kind of really have a greening of the workforce, right? And so the workforce that comes in today and experiences roles and responsibilities in all of those estimating portfolios that we covered are really much more confident that if I have an easy to digest kind of consumerism, this is what I'm doing, and I understand how it contributes. It really is the advantage that we have now to create that centralized source of the truth that can still be harmonized by specialization of my role and responsibility, but I don't have to have that crazy integration. And then just as important, what you built on there, John, which is, this is how I get up front, and now I can bring a price to win strategy in that doesn't risk the farm, right? Which is what I think heard a little bit when Magnus was tying back to kind of the genesis of the whole reason is to get the sales organization and the delivery organization on the same page that, we won the contract under these terms and conditions, we have to manage to that. So I think it's the combination of the right technology at the right maturation and the disruption that I mentioned in the very beginning about some of these startups that is becoming the opportunity for the 25 and the SAP team to go beyond that 1 + 1 and deliver significant outcomes for our customers in ways heretofore that, 5 years ago we'd have sat around and said, that's an interesting problem. Let's see if we got something else we can solve for, right? And that's not the case anymore, really, with this partnership.
Yeah, thank you, David. I think another way to put it, and I agree with everything you guys said, but the other thing to me, which is part of that 1+1 is 3, is the fact that everything we do in 25 becomes better because the data that we pull out of SAP. So our estimates become more accurate because we have access to all the actual performance and all the work that have been done in the past. And on the flip side of that, we also feed better proposals straight into SAP to make the handoff and the delivery more smooth for SAP in terms of delivering that work. So it really is a continuous cycle where we're pulling things from and we're pushing things in. And that kind of makes for a much, it's not only a more streamlined, efficient process, but it also yields better results. I think there's a very, and then of course there's the other just pure technological benefit here, which is worth highlighting in the fact that the 25 application is built on the SAP Business Technology Platform, the BTP, using the SAP HANA database underneath the hood. So from an IT architecture and even the sovereign cloud concept of moving into NS2 and whatnot, we're kind of fully interlocked there, but from a risk profile for the end customers, like a Lockheed or whatever, they get not just, 25 is great at cost estimating and pricing. They've actually built it also in a way that it kind of glove on hand fits together with everything that they're doing with SAP as well. So I think that's another benefit that helps make it a lot easier for companies to say that the SAP plus 25 is really a winning combination. Let's talk a little bit about the value. The things that are at stake here for the large OEMs is their bidding. I guess, what are the main sources of value that you see that this unlocks for the industry, like if they enable this solution?
The real value, as I mentioned earlier, is profitability through the entire life cycle. The 25 solution is very strong and will enhance and does enhance probability of win. But what it really unlocks is confidence in the proposal that was submitted, in the response that was submitted. Confidence that the factors that have been brought together in the labor and material cost estimating are more precise, have anticipated risk, and at the long term can be delivered profitably. That's the value. Now, the adjacency to that is that has become increasingly important for 2 reasons. 1, the competitive landscape, and 2, the need to boost production. So we have new entrants into the defense industrial base who are causing all of the established companies to rethink how they respond. And secondly, there are significant, because of the geopolitical environments, companies are being asked to boost production. What does that mean? What do those 2 factors mean together? They mean the sensitivity or the impact of making a bad decision is greater than it's ever been before. A poor response and a poor bid can effectively be betting the company. And so right now is the time for aerospace and defense companies to really invest in capture management tools and processes like 25. Those are my thoughts. Dave, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Well, I'll just build upon what you said, John. I definitely agree with all of your points, and you can net it out. There was a time when esoterically people would say that the OEM deliverable was the loss leader, with the intention that we will earn back our profitability on a 10-year, 20-year kind of locked in maintenance and service agreement, right? The ubiquitous thing of, I will sell you power by the hour is probably one of the easy ones to think of. But the reality comes into the fact that, those branches of service that those things go into, those organizations also have for years done, care and feeding and maintaining of assets. And so when they get in there, they kind of claw back a little bit of that profitability. So ultimately, all of your tenets are great, right? I want to build that intestinal fortitude that I will be profitable even during the OEM phase, right? I may accept the smaller margin, but I also need to be able to, when I've modeled that profitability for the 5-year, 10-year, 20-year life of the asset, I want to take those inflection points at those annual milestones and making sure that the program is performing to the intention. And that's what I think is the new tools that are available from kind of the philosophy of how 25 is kind of ring fencing that entire, like I said, contract award, contract performance and delivery, post-delivery profitability. Very, very, very important. And the last one is easy. It's a splash headline, right? There's a munitions supplier, right, within the ecosystem that basically told the government, well, it's great that you want us to increase production to this number of units, but guess what, right? We can't do it without, in reality, a facility investment. Well, that stood there for about 3 months, and then the Department of War said, we've reviewed the data, we get it. So now what they've done, right, they're breaking ground to establish that munitions plant. So I think that's kind of the additional value of understanding, how you and your supply chain are going to be profitable, even when you're going to try and say, increase production from 100 units a month to 1,000 units a month, and you just simply say the math doesn't work. But I think that contracting world allowed them to come in and just add the evidence there that says, okay, to do this, this is what we need. It comes down to capacity, comes down to facilities. And that was then built into the contract. So good for that organization to have that intestinal fortitude. But yes, your value play there is spot on. It's from the very beginning as to why we even want to bid against competitor X to win this business. And then the proverbial, be careful of what you land on the end of the line so that, you make money throughout the life cycle.
Yeah, I wanted to build on this question because I see two other value drivers in the industry right now. One of them is kind of tied upon what you're saying, but the reality is the government is looking to speed up the acquisition process, and a lot of that is because the threat profile is changing so fast that they can't afford to have these super long government acquisition processes. So they're trying to move faster, and they're frustrated with how long it takes suppliers to move. So there's an element of like making this proposal process faster. So we think we can help there. And there's another element here, which is that there's a lot of companies that have had compliance violations for faulty pricing and whatnot. And there's very stiff fines if you get caught doing things not in the right way, where 25 can also help ensure that you're doing all the right things throughout this process and that you have full traceability back to the sources that have been used for estimating and whatnot. But from my side, these are two other value drivers where 25 can help.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, to recap the points you're making, one is companies are being asked to accelerate time to market. And as a result, the material cost estimating and labor cost estimating components of what they do are becoming increasingly important. And then you nailed it in terms of compliance. We all know that in almost every kind of contract form, the government basically operates and insists upon an open book. Aerospace and defense companies have to know that the source of their data is traceable and accurate and defensible. And if it's brought together in an ad hoc way across disparate systems, it only increases the risk of error. Even if it's unintentional, it increases the risk that the estimate was not accurate or the underlying data was not representative of the true costs. And as a result, the company is opening itself up to risk. And all the more reason that harmonizing this in 25 reduces risk and adds, accelerated time to market. So great points, Magnus.
Excellent. Let me finish up with the hot topic of the day, right? You cannot have a podcast without talking about AI, right? I think we had colleagues going to Sapphire, and I think I'm not sure how frequent the word AI was mentioned, but maybe every other 10 words or something like that was the word AI. So let's talk a little bit about that, because there's a lot of things happening in the industry. Everybody's chasing AI, what AI can and cannot do. There's a lot of AI initiatives that fail, and there are a lot of them that succeed. What do you think are the key things to make sure that AI is successful in this domain?
Yeah, so it builds a little bit on John's last answer, which was really that the data, right, needs to be grounded and trusted. If not, then the other buzzword that we hear in the world of AI is hallucination, right? So where did I get that information from that the material for this line item within an indentured structure was ever going to be at 7 cents kind of per unit? So one of the areas that we've got to take a look at AI is that I believe it's going to allow even the estimating process to more efficiently go horizontally, right? We've talked a few times about if you have, let's say, your tier one suppliers also using a 25 system, there's no reason why that propulsion manufacturer, that actuation manufacturer can't bring that database to bear as the prime is putting together the overall rack and stack and build up of the estimation for that. So I think that's definitely one area where AI is going to help us, and that is going horizontally across all the departments, going horizontally within an organization across responsibilities and pulling grounded data back together to build it up. And then I think the other area where AI is going to really kind of help us is it won't necessarily have to, wait for an answer to be obtained. It can present information for the person that's responsible to accept it, right, and embrace it and then consume it in the next higher level. But I agree with you. At Sapphire, yes, it had to be, I don't know about every 10 words, but it was certainly within a 60-second span, AI had to be mentioned once. John, you were there. What was your experience, and how does it relate to 25 and SAP?
Yeah, absolutely. No, you nailed it, Dave. It comes back to, I think, what we started this conversation about, which is, a source of truth. We cannot live in a world of AI predictably or responsibly unless we're able to leverage that back and trace that back to a source of truth. It's only as good as the data. The model is only as good as the underlying data. And as we're living in a world of AI, we've got to make sure that we're operating in that source of truth. And that's really what both SAP and 25 bring to the table at the front end and throughout the life cycle is a harmonized source of truth to unleash the power of AI. So that would be my perspective.
So that concludes my questions, James, John. I really appreciate the time, and thanks for joining the podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you,
Yes,
guys.
always a pleasure.